Hi there. I'm not sure whether this thought experiment is going to work very well, but anyway, here goes. It concerns two sayings which I come across about the adepts of the, I don't know, the Great White Brotherhood of or the aspiring persons like yourself, seekers like me. I'm not sure whether we're adepts or not. But anyway, certainly we're seekers. And it seems that there's two types of seeker, which correspond to these two formulae. And the one that I got recently was that the heads of the seekers are in the clouds, or above the clouds rather, and their feet stand on the earth. But there is another type of seeker, and their heads are above the clouds, but their feet are below the hells. And I actually got this from Aleister Crowley, who probably got it from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, from whom, of course, he nicked quite a lot of information and materials, allegedly. Anyway, so we talk about the clouds. The clouds themselves actually represent or are symbolic of the abyss. And the abyss separates the first three sephirot of the Kabbalistic tree of life. So we've got like three sephirot here, Keter, Choma, and Bina. And then there's an abyss. And then you've got the other seven sephirot down here, down this bit here. And this bit is separated from this bit by a massive gulf. A huge, great gulf. And admittedly, within that gulf or abyss, you have Darth, which is the so-called false Sephiroth. But that's for another discussion, really. Anyway, so these are the sort of the clouds that hide the supernal triad from the other seven Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. And so basically, what they're saying here is that the head, or the consciousness of the seeker or the adept, I suppose, the person who has reached or attained liberation or is attaining liberation, and in a way, of course, we have already attained spiritual liberation. We just don't realize it, in fact. But anyway, the consciousness is above Keter. Because in fact the consciousness of the individual soul has already passed beyond Keter. Well, it never actually left beyond Keter, in fact, but it just thought it had. Anyway, never mind about that. As far as we're concerned, looking at attainment as a kind of going up the ladder, as it were, our objective is to go beyond Keter, beyond the Tree of Life itself. So our consciousness exists in the limitless light beyond. And so the heads of the adepts or the seekers or those who have attained, indeed is above the clouds. And there's no argument about that as far as these two formulae are concerned. However, where they differ is the fact that the one on the left here, their feet are on the earth, and that's very significant because the earth, of course, is matter. It's the material world. And the point about the material world is it is observed and measured and stewarded and I suppose exploited, really, and manipulated by science and empiricism, and an understanding of science, technology, technological developments, research and development, by the materialist. So one imagines the scientist, chemists and biologists as being hard-headed materialists, as indeed physicists are really. They're just misunderstood by a lot of people who think that there's some kind of spirituality to physics. I'm not quite sure there is in that formal sense of the word. Anyway, depends what you define as spiritual. Anyway, the point is that the adept's feet are on in the material, and of course you're going to say, well, matter is illusory. Okay, the Gnostics agree that matter is not only evil. Well, it's evil because it's illusory, because it is a distraction, because it doesn't really exist, and yet Here we have science, bobbing along quite merrily in on a material plane which apparently doesn't exist. And you try walking through a wall, you'll get a headache. So the Earth may be illusory, and it may be created as if it is real by the demiurge, and it may be below the supernal realms of the good God, which it is. Yet it is real. I mean, it's what we have. It's the matter that we are working with. It's the plasticine into which we are putting, our thumb in order to make an impression on the plasticine. So it does conform to the as-if principle, which you work with something as if it is real, and I mean it certainly seems real. All our senses and all our observations and measurements seem to suggest the reality of this illusory place we call the Earth, or Malkut in Kabbalistic terms, and yet why does the adept need to stand on the Earth? Because they need to acknowledge that they are on the Earth, and that they need to stay earthed, and they need to earth themselves after any particular ritual or meditation. That's important. That's important. You go fix the shingles. You go for a jog. You eat properly. You exercise. You preserve your body, because this is the vehicle which conveys your psychic vehicles around the place, and which brings you into contact with esoteric levels of various kinds, and from which you will be liberated if you attain ultimate mind liberation. So you're honouring the Earth, you're honouring the materialist, the secularist, the atheist even. You're not against them. You're not hating them, despising them, disdaining them, thinking they're kind of some sort of inferior person to you. So that's important. So we have a sort of dichotomy here between an acceptance of the material world as we see it and observe it and measure it on one hand, and yet we have a metaphysical belief in the supernal worlds, in the worlds of the good God, in the worlds of non-duality, which exists far, far beyond and above us, as it were, in quotation marks. And our heads, in fact, are above they're above the clouds of the abyss and above the supernal triad, even because when we have attained, we will leave the tree of life altogether. Whereas, as I said, we just become aware that we've never left it. In fact, which is another way of putting it, really, the more accurate way of putting it, I suppose. And so that's kind of like great, really. And I think I like this formula because it honours the Earth, it honours material, it honours materialism almost as well, even. It honours living on this earth and living in the world and living in the world of men and women, and honouring the obligations of the householder, to put it in Hindu terms. And yet, you can jump out of this materialist world through the vision of the Holy Grail, for example, and you can also through spontaneous introspection, you can also go beyond this world and attain to the supernal triad, attain to the world of non-duality, to the good God, and have a vision of the good God and have an experience of the good God, which we call the luminous experience, and that stands apart and yet also connected to the material world. Now, if we come over here to this formula, this is a formula which, as I say, got from Aleister Crowley, and he talks about the feet being below the hells, and this is a very interesting formula. Though it seems to me to be actually a Buddhist formula, in the sense that the clouds, the supernal triad, the heaven, and the hells, the various hells that exist, they are basically all in our minds. It is the consciousness of the monk, the consciousness of the yogi, the consciousness of the creative mind and the contemplative mind that has created both heaven and hell. So they don't actually exist ultimately. But I mean, your feet are below the hells, below the shells, the realm of the Qipot, for example, who supposed to feed on human frailty. It's the realm of madness, of course, and the realm of addiction, and intoxication, and the libertine, and even the psychopath. They all partake of the realms of hell, the realms of the Qipot, of the shells, and yet they are illusory, of course, just the same as matter is illusory, but also heaven itself is illusory. So, you know, we've got a sort of an atheistic model almost of this arising, since heaven and God and hell and the Qipot and the angels and the demons and the whole kit and caboodle is just a projection of your own consciousness as you're sitting comfortably in your yogi posture, going into deep trance and meditating and going into, as I say, into some kind of altered state of consciousness. As I say, this really is almost the consciousness of the Buddha. And to be able to encompass reality, or as it is, in quotation marks, because, as it says here, there is realization that it all comes from the mind, and to the mind it shall return. The mind is real in the sense that it is of supreme value. So here we're not placing a value on anything that the mind creates. We're creating a value of mind itself. So mind becomes of supreme value rather than that which it creates or projects or formulates or meditates on even. And I think this is, you know, so the whole of the Kabbalah, whole of magic and psychism and esotericism and mysticism really don't leave the think, therefore I am sort of paradigm, really, a sort of Cartesian paradigm. So there's no metaphysics here at all, really. But of course, Aleister Crowley was supposed to be rather perplexed by the end of his life because he was very stuck, very split between a belief in an external astral plane, an external esoteric plane, and even an external God. And his Buddhist training, which taught in the Theravada view, you know, that everything is illusory and that all form is empty of reality except the mind, except the dharma of the mind, and the svadharma, where the mind encompasses all this in trance, you see. So as you can see, this opens up a wide split, really, between two forms of adept or seeker. One who just believes it's all in the mind, and the other who believes that there is an ultimate reality, even and they having established there is an ultimate reality. They don't mind dealing with having connection to the reality, in quotation marks, of the world of the demiurge. I ought to leave it there because I don't really know. I mean, is there a right answer? I don't know if there's a right answer. Who is right? I think if it works for you, if this kind of Buddhist thing works for you, that's all very good. But I mean, obviously for some people, you know, working with the hells and with the Qipot is really not a good idea. You may not have any trust or love for them, and they may not have any trust or love for you. In which case, you know, you're going to have an adversarial relationship with the Qipot and with things, extreme practices, as they called, and you could come a serious psychological cropper with this sort of what might be called a left-hand path approach, because you lose all sense of reality and you become addicted and obsessed and you go basically insane with it all. And some people, I think Crowley, he had moments of madness, utter insanity, which not even his sort of sense of satire could get him out of very often. And at the end of his life, he was supposed to be perplexed because he never really resolved the question: is it real or is it illusion? Whereas the Gnostic, has this metaphysical belief in an ultimate reality, which is God, which is the supernal triad, which is the realms of non-duality, far, far above the whole tree of life, and indeed exiting the tree of life at some point as well to attain this ultimate reality, which is even beyond Keter itself, on one hand, and yet they're earthed on the other. They have this connection with the earth, and they don't even mind the atheist and materialist and empiricist. They have a working relationship. They have an appreciation, indeed, for science and the empirical method, and not violating Occam's razor and all that. And they have the kind of harmonic relationship, if you like, with the earth and with the people that steward it and measure it and even use it to create technological breakthrough. So, as I said, I don't know which is the right answer. I don't know who has the right answer, really. I think I'm probably more leaning on the side of Gnosticism, mysticism, and a theistic, in quotation marks, well, not in quotation marks, a theistic paradigm, which also makes me able to be a scientist. I suppose I'm like John Faraday, the famous scientist Faraday, who had no trouble. He was a deist, and he had no trouble believing in God, and also being a hard-headed scientist and physicist and a materialist. And I think, it's nice to harmonise the two, really. And I think, but people will say, well, where does that leave all this occult stuff, mysticism and spoon bending and demons and angels and goetic rituals and Kabbalistic rituals and I don't know, ectoplasm and exorcism and I don't know, the whole astral stuff. Where does that leave that? Well, I have to say that looking at these two poles, if you like, I would say these are the two bar stools. Really, you can either sit on the bar stool, which has your adept having his feet below the hells, or you can sit on a bar stool with the adept standing on the earth solidly. But I think all the psychic stuff, all the astral stuff, falls between two bar stools in a drunken heap on the floor.